Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to ATCM's High Street Conversations for the 13th of May. And we're going to be discussing a challenge which has been ongoing for a number of years and which has emerged again recently, which I do think we need to discuss. We probably don't discuss it often enough. And that is the closure of banks on high streets. So we're going to start off big picture. And I know I say this often, and I cannot stress how important it is to recognise the amount of change we're seeing and how much of it impacts high streets. We are living through an industrial revolution. We are seeing changes, especially with digital technology, which is completely changing the game in terms of town centres. Now, the rate of change consumes just about everything, and it has multiple impacts for our economy. Whether it's the way hospitality operates, whether it's the way we consume entertainment, whether it's the way we shop, it's all in flux. It is all completely fluid, and it is all being driven by innovation in technology. And there's probably one innovation which is more important than anything else, which we seldom recognise, and it's this thing. It's the bank card. The bank card has made a massive shift in terms of how we do business. It might be the most disruptive innovation of all. And the reason why is it's just opened the door to so many different forms of quick and convenient payments. And those quick and convenient payments have revolutionized economic transactions, and they underpin almost all the other digital innovations we talk about impacting the high street. You see, the thing is the buyer and the seller no longer need to be in the same place at the same time, and that allows online business to flourish because we don't need to go into retail stores anymore. We don't need to go into restaurants anymore. We can purchase goods from wherever we are on the move. And that digitalization of cash means cash, the use of cash is on the decline. So this coming from UK Finance, UK Cash and Cash Machine reports for 2024. The number of cash payments in the UK declined by 7% in 2023 in comparison to 2022. Cash was used to make just 12% of all payments in the UK in 2023. I didn't realize that it was that low in terms of the volume of payments being made by cash. So that is small, isn't it? That is not a lot at all. However, despite cash being used in only 12% of all payments, it is still the second most frequently used payment method in the UK in 2023. Debit cards being top of the list. So that shows you that the way we make payments has become extremely fragmented with so many different forms and methods of making payments. Alongside that, the development of apps that allow people to manage their banking accounts just makes retail banking almost completely redundant for routine uses for a lot of people. So for those who have set up their banking apps, and if you have access to digital payments, I bet the amount of times you go into a bank now compared to what it would have been a few years ago, it has really declined. And you look at this chart, looking at the penetration rate for online banking in the UK between 2007 to 2023. And it is a steady increasing rise, almost year on year. You have some years where it is stagnant and there's very little change. And then other years where the change is 5-6% at a time, with a big spike, obviously, in 2020, jumping from 8% to 86%, where it's pretty much remained fairly static since then up to 2023. And that chart is almost the complete inverse of another chart I'm going to show you in a second. It's been admitted by the banks that this change is what they call profound. So when he was the Treasury Committee head of the Treasury Committee, Mel Stride, wrote to the banks to inquire about closures. And the CEO of Barclays, Matt Hammerstein, replied saying, profound technological changes and the ease with which customers can access their accounts digitally means our physical branch network is experiencing a sustained fall in demand. In fact, the majority of our customers, 74%, now choose to interact with us via telephone, online, or mobile banking. TSB Bank also replied saying that now over 90% of its transactions were done digitally. The truth is, demand for high street banks is in complete free fall. And it's probably something which is going to be fairly difficult to arrest. And when you look at this chart, which is the inverse of that one, looking at the growth of online banking, this is the total number of bank branches and building societies in the UK. Since 1986, the reason for the difference in the lines is the blue line is data collected by the British Banking Association. The red line is data collected by the Office for National Statistics, so slightly different data sets. However, they show exactly the same trend. It is only going one way. So from 20,000 plus in the mid 80s down to well under 10,000 by 2022. And for us, what we need to focus on is the impact of the closure of those banks on high streets, because the implications are many. Probably top of the list for a lot of us will be what to do with that vacant space. Sometimes that space is easier to bring back into use, and other times, sometimes it's a listed heritage building and it can be really difficult to convert to anything else. And there are other problems in just trying to fill that vacant space. The suffocation of the circulation of cash within a local economy holds so many challenges for small businesses and communities who rely on physical currency. And that disadvantage can be transferred to that town centre that then lacks that banking access, because those people that do need to trade in cash, their footfall goes elsewhere. And that can be a real challenge for some bank branches. Recognizing the challenges, a couple of years ago, legislation came in to try and protect access to cash. So in 2023, Parliament passed the Financial Services and Markets Act, which gave the Financial Conduct Authority the ability to try and maintain cash by saying that in assessments would need to be carried out before the final bank could be closed in any town to ensure the necessary access was there. There's also been a push to provide alternative services as well. Cash Access UK has been opening up community banking hubs to allow banks to share facilities in a single space. Just recently, one in Lancashire was opened in Kirkham, the 150th hub in the UK, and they continue to grow, they continue to be developed. And for those who were able to join us in summer school in Leicester back in, I'm trying to think, was it 2023? Would have had the opportunity to meet and listen to Kat Farrow, who is one of the senior team members from Cash Access UK. So she was able to join us, and it was clear from her that there's a real push to deliver as many community banking hubs as possible. And it doesn't necessarily solve the issue of some of those listed buildings becoming vacant, but it does resolve some of the other issues of that suffocation of the use of cash in a town, and bringing that ability to engage with your local bank back onto the high street. However, what was also clear is that Kat and her team were absolutely swamped with demand, with a long, long list of areas already signed up to get community banking hubs, and so many of our members in the room wanting to engage with her to get their town on the list. and it's clearly something that is going to take years to work through to fulfill that demand. And all that being said, there's no guarantees that either legislation or the provision of alternative services will be able to modify the change in consumer behavior given the rate it is changing at. It will be really interesting to see how all this unfolds. And ultimately, we need to ask ourselves if banks are destined to disappear completely, if cash will go with it, and what that means for high streets and our local economies in terms of how we trade. So for today's conversation, a couple of things on the menu. Firstly, what are the implications for the closure of high street banks in your towns, and how are you responding? Sorry, can I just ask everybody to put themselves on mute as well? We're getting a bit of feedback through on the sound. And just before we start, just to say to the protagonists in the story, are really doing their best to support High Street. So, in past few weeks, both Visa and American Express have come forward with schemes. So, I need to give you all the heads up. UK wide, Visa has launched its Let's Celebrate Towns initiative. So, those people doing great work in small towns can win up to £20,000 if they submit their work as part of Visa's application process. There's additional information on our website and it's been sent out through our emails. Feel free to contact us for any additional information. And as of yesterday, American Express is relaunching its Back in Small Restaurants grant scheme. So restaurants both across Greater London and Greater Manchester can apply for up to £11,000 to invest in their businesses where those restaurants are important to community and have great ideas on how to innovate to grow their business. So we will have more details on that coming out in the next few hours, but that scheme has just opened. Both come to a close in June. So more details on that are available. So without further ado, can I start by bringing in Paul Ambrose? And Paul, as some of you would have heard beforehand, was one of the ones keen to discuss this topic as it does have ramifications for Rochdale. So Paul, do you want to take it away and talk to us about some of the challenges you've got locally?
Yes, thanks, OJ. Look, it's a problem that we're all facing. So pre-pandemic, if I go back, we lost Royal Bank of Scotland, which was a listed building, but thankfully that was taken over by Amber Taverns. It's become a successful pub. The Abbey National was bought by the council pre-pandemic, and that became the music centre. Now that feels like a long time ago. So post-pandemic, last year we lost Barclays Bank. And all these buildings I'm going to mention all fall within the town centre conservation area. They all lie next to one another, grand old banks, beautiful in their own rights. So we lost Barclays Bank over a year ago. That's still on the market. We're about to lose across the road NatWest Bank. That shuts in June. Again, a lovely building overlooking Town Hall Square. The former post office building, again overlooking Town Hall Square. It's listed. It's been vacant for some time now, and there's strong rumours circulating that HSBC is also going to close next year. Very grand three-storey building. Now these are the gateway buildings as you arrive into the town centre. What we found is that these banks that are closing, the ones that are closing soonest, they're not owned by the banks. They are private landlords. And if you look at the case of Barclays Bank in Rochdale, the landlord who owns it, he still wants, from memory, £70,000 a year, which I can assure you is a hell of a lot in Rochdale town centre. So he's not in the real world in terms of what that rental demand should look like. And I've said to OJ, look, pre-pandemic, yes, we might have got a national hospitality venue looking at these banks to take them over. That interest isn't there. The office market is relatively weak in Rochdale town centre. And I suppose I'm here now. I'm normally the internal optimist. But what do you do with these buildings? It's really difficult to imagine what uses are going to go into them. And of course, as we all know, the longer these buildings remain vacant, the roof starts leaking, one or two other things, like, the more difficult it is to find a suitable long-term tenant. So literally, I'm reaching out to say a bit of help, really, in terms of, are there any good examples of bids and local authorities and landlords working together proactively into finding long-term suitable uses for them. But yeah, it's a growing problem. As we know, it's going to get worse, I feel, before it gets better. But yeah, so that's sort of short summary of where we are in Rochdale Town Centre. We don't have a strategy to deal with them. Like I said, landlords, I think they've got their head in the sand a little bit. But yeah, so what do we do with them? Over to you guys.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And the challenges of banks disappearing from high streets has been our agenda for years. But I think, Paul, one of the things you really opened my eyes to when you sent the email just saying, look, this is what's happening in Rochdale. I'd never really considered the type of buildings that are being impacted by the loss of banks. And I know banks will find themselves in all sorts of types of buildings, but there are just some which are extremely difficult to convert and to bring back into use, cannot be done cheaply, and are some of the nicest buildings we have in our town centres as well. And that just brings a whole new dynamic to it. And when you consider as well, the change we're seeing across the economy, I talk about the industrial revolution and the change in terms of our digital economy. That pressure is everywhere. So there, no doubt, that will mean other empty units as well. So having the demand there to be able to pick up that empty space, it's not that easy. It's really not that easy. So I feel like maybe we do collectively need to work on a strategy, need to understand what we can do in preparation for some of these banks leaving. And I would say to all members as well, if you're not a major city centre, if you're not a regional hub, then I would not be surprised if you've got banks on your high street that are planning to vacate at some point soon. We know the list of bank branches that have already announced closures that are coming is a pretty big one. So I would prepare, I would get ready. So that I think that's partly the purpose of this meeting. It's understanding how can we plan, what can we do. So we're gonna leave that question open in terms of what other people have been doing, how other people have responded. And first, I want to bring in Jordan Newfield from the Association of Convenience Stores, organisation we've worked with for years. And in terms of their businesses, really are the sort of beating heart of a lot of local centres, district centres, where that circulation of cash is really important and will no doubt be at, challenged by that availability of cash. So, Jordan, you want to take it away? Do you want to discuss with us both the challenges for your members in terms of the importance of the access for cash and also any work you've been doing in terms of responding to things like bank closures and cash machines as well?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, AJ. I'm gonna just share my screen because I've got a few slides, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I've got the obligatory question of can you see my screen, which I'm sure you can. Yeah.
perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Jordan Newfield, Public Affairs Manager at ACS. We represent 50,000 convenience stores and petrol forecourt sites across the UK. And as AJ said, I'm going to talk about access to cash in the context of bank closures and the increasingly vital role that convenience stores are playing in promoting that financial inclusion, and also touch upon the new regulatory landscape and how organisations like the FCA, Link, and Cash Access UK are addressing this issue. And there might be a bit of overlap from what OJ was discussing. But first of all, oh, and yeah, literally some overlap because I have the exact same graph that OJ shared. But yeah, so we banks are on the decline, but the impact for us really is seen through the decline in ATM numbers. So since 2015, we've lost around 6,000 bank branches and with them thousands of ATMs. And for many communities, especially in rural and lower income areas, it's become harder to access cash. Because as banks retreat from the high street, the places people can get hold of money are of course disappearing too. And I'll come to this shortly, but as OJ briefly said, yeah, cash is pretty important for us, not just because of the services we provide, but because of cash still being popular in the UK convenience stores. So why cash still matters? I think, yeah, this is often, when having these conversations with policymakers, it's often, preaching to the choir or pushing an open door, whatever metaphor you want to go for. But there's no doubt the decline in banks is due to the decline in the demand for face-to-face banking. But we have data from the Link and Royal Society of Arts that shows that cash is still really important. And though, whilst it is on the decline, it's still going to be used for many years to come. People still find it useful for things like budgeting, just having that independence, or simply some people might not have access to digital payment methods. And it's not just consumers, but the small businesses as well often prefer to use cash. It's still used in roughly half of transactions made in convenience stores. The average basket spend in a convenience store is about £8 to £9, and I think people prefer to use cash when they are making those smaller transactions. So as banks and other institutions leave the high streets, convenience stores are becoming more than just places to buy groceries. They're essentially evolving into service hubs. They offer everything from postal services, parcel collection, financial transactions. They're sort of bridging that gap between online and physical retail. So typically, if I order something online, I might pick it up or return it in a physical store. So yeah, although OJ said people might not have the reason to go into stores, I think it is still quite important people using them for those kind of services, because shops are able to provide that access and that support and that human presence where other services have disappeared. So financial services in the high street are still really important, and an increasing number of convenience stores are offering things like ATMs, cashback, bill payment services. Most notably, the post offices is quite a critical part of that offer. About 8,000 of the UK's 11,500 post office branches are located in convenience stores. So that really allows people to withdraw or deposit cash or kind of handle business banking and access postal services. But you also have other services as well that have filled the gaps where banks haven't. So you have PayPoint, allowing people to pay bills, pay their rent, pay TV licenses, top up their mobile phones. And then you have other services that allow people to send money abroad, like Western Union and MoneyGram. And these are essential, everyday financial services that are available locally, conveniently, and often late into the evening. And I'm not saying they are, there's no issue with bank closures because convenience stores have done this all, but this is just the way that convenience stores are playing their part, and increasingly so. But yeah, the new FCA powers, the new regulatory landscape that OJ touched on before. So I don't want to duplicate too much, but the FCA essentially has the powers to ensure that reasonable access to cash is maintained across the UK, and they have to monitor the availability of cash access services like ATMs, cashback, bank branches, and essentially assess whether people and businesses can reasonably access them based on various needs. And this is not just, based on broad square footage of if there's cash access in that area. It's based on things like population needs, accessibility, vulnerability, the difference in geography, transport. So banks and building societies like Barclays, Lloyds, NatWest, they're now required to assess the impact of any planned closure or changes to cash services. So if they shut down a branch or remove the ATM, they have to consider how that gap could be addressed. There's also a new mechanism called a cash access request. So it's often used by MPs. MPs love doing this to show that they're doing something. They would fill out that cash access request to address the needs in their area, but anyone can do it. I can do it. Local authorities often do it. Consumer groups do it. They can raise concerns about cash access in their area. And the FCA is responsible for responding to these requests and working with firms to address problems identified. Just to share as well, because it's relevant, in December, Link created a cash locator to find things like banks, post offices, and cashback in their area. And this is a screenshot of near where I live. And that shows the availability of things like banks and post offices and ATMs and even banking hubs as well, to help consumers make the assessment of whether or not they need to fill in a cash access request. But yeah, the rollout of banking hubs has been quite key to this. So just as a recap, there's kind of a shared space where customers from different banks can access banking services like withdrawing and depositing cash, paying in checks, or just speaking to a representative from their bank on specific days of the week. And each day will have a different bank. And currently there are 150 banking hubs open, and this is expected to rise by 230 by the end of 2025. And the decision on establishing a banking hub is made through an independent assessment process, usually triggered by a bank closing, and it's coordinated by Cash Access UK. For ACS, this is obviously a welcome decision, particularly in towns where bank branches have vanished entirely. But obviously they're not a silver bullet, and they take a lot of time to set up, and they do rely on community demand, and they don't reach every area that needs help. And I've had so many retailers say to me, how do I apply for a banking hub? But you can't apply for one. The Cash Access UK has to assess the need and speak directly to you. But it is dependent on whether or not there is demand. And they are prioritising where there is very little cash provision already. But the rollout of banking hubs has been a pretty core part of Labour's plan for reviving the high streets. And it's presented as a practical way of bringing essential services back into communities and supporting local economies. But we always stress that banking hubs need to complement, not replace, the role that convenience stores are already playing in providing access to cash and financial services, because retailers are there every day already offering these services, and often at low margin and without formal recognition or support. So a campaign for us is to encourage, before assessing cash access provision, to actually speak to the retailers in their area. Because one thing that we are discussing when they first started consulting on the new cash access requests is there was initially this assumption that if a convenience store provides cashback, particularly cashback without purchase, then there it is, you can access cash. But it's quite a lot on a retailer to provide cash on demand. They often do it at their own discretion, and often convenience stores don't want to carry a lot of cash in their store anyway. So they might want to provide cashback, or they might just want to say no and say, no, we need to keep the cash on site. I did want to talk about another issue, which is slightly off topic, but it's a big campaign that we're working on, and it's quite technical, so I'll try not to bore you with it. But there's a massive pressure on access to cash with the funding model for free-to-use ATMs. So independent ATMs are funded by an interchange fee, and this is paid for by the customer's bank to the ATM operator every time cash is withdrawn. And this fee is set by Link, which is the UK's ATM network. And right now that fee is 26.5 pence per withdrawal. And this has been frozen at this level since August 2022. But the cost of running ATMs are rising rapidly. Operators are facing high costs for things like installation, maintenance, cash handling, insurance, and this is all made worse by inflation. And as a result, many ATM operators are telling retailers that they can't keep the ATM as free to use anymore. They either have to remove it or switch it to a pay to use model. And no one likes having to pay to withdraw cash. No one likes seeing that £1.99 fee to access your own cash. And from a PR perspective, if I didn't know anything about this, if I didn't know anything about interchange fees, which is most people, I would go into a shop and see they suddenly start charging me to withdraw my cash. I'd probably think it was the decision of the retailer to start charging to withdraw cash. So a big campaign we're on at the moment is we're calling for interchange fees to be increased in order to sustain the UK's ATM network. So we're calling for the Treasury, FCA, Link, the PSR at one point, but they're looking to be disbanded now, to actually review ATM interchange fees to ensure that they can actually maintain the spread of the UK's free-to-use ATM now. So that was slightly off tangent, but a key campaign that we've been working on. So to summarise, cash is obviously still vital, but access is under threat, and convenience stores are doing what they can to fill that gap that's left behind by banks. But policymakers really need to recognise that retailers are already doing the work, and any new solutions, whether it's regulatory or through banking hubs or whatever it is, they need to build on this foundation and ensure that retailers are a part of that conversation. So that's it.
That's great, Jordan. Thank you so much. Quick question for you to start off with. What impact do your members notice when that final bank branch closes in their town? Is there a noticeable difference in terms of trade and footfall?
It really varies. It can go either way because often when a bank closes it, it has a massive impact on if the retailer isn't already providing cash access services, you know, because a lot of people use cash, often the retailer needs to use a bank as well for depositing withdrawals. So they're not just representing consumers, but they're representing themselves as well when we talk about access to cash. But, you know, often there has been instances where they'd report an increase in footfall as a result of the closure of banks, because more people are going to ATMs in shops to withdraw cash, which is obviously a good thing because it does drive that footfall. So, yeah, a benefit and a positive and a negative there.
Yeah, really interesting, really interesting. And I think in terms of um, you say that you think cash is going to be around for a long time still, and I think I agree with that. And looking at the stats in terms of the increase in online banking, we had a big spike in 2020 since the pandemic, and since then it's almost remained flat. Almost like you've got this just core segment of people who, for whatever reason, cash still remains an important part of the way they trade for whatever reason. Do you think that last group of people is just always going to need to use cash for whatever reason it might be? No, and I'm thinking of families that have said in even just to be able to balance the books at the end of the week, they prefer to use cash
Mm.
during the cost of living crisis because it just makes things like household budgeting so much easier. They know what they're paying for. It, is that the sense you get that that final cohort, that last 10-15%, they're probably going to end up being that they're going to need to continue to rely on cash?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. I think there will still be that reliance on cash, particularly for budgeting. I recommend reading that. I mean, it's a few years old now, but it's a really good report by Link and the Royal Society of Arts on the cash dependency, and it kind of breaks it down across regions across the UK, and not just so much about the reliance on cash, but how people would view an eventual move away from cash and how they would struggle to cope if cash was removed entirely. And I think there it might be broadly on the decline, but you often see occasional spikes, particularly in the cost of living crisis, where people still want to use cash to really make sure that they can budget for the rest of the week.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And right, and I'm going to open the floor up to everybody else as well. So we've got fundamentally two different problems with the closures of banks. We've got the challenges of some really key property being left empty and needing a strategy for how we bring that property back into use. And then secondly, we've got some of the challenges around the use of cash and what that means in terms of for those people who still need banking services, how do we retain that footfall? Jordan has told us just how important convenience stores can be in terms of providing some, not all of the services, banking hubs as well. But as we heard, Cash Access UK decides when and where these banking hubs will be set up. And as we found out at summer school, they've got a lot of demand. So it's not something that can be turned around overnight. So I'm really keen to hear other people's experiences in different towns as well. So if you want to either put your hand up to come in and give us your experience or put something in the chat box, then do feel free. And Paul, just in the meantime, to come back to you as well, is so you've talked about, I think it was two banks that have closed and a possible another two that could disappear. Was that right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's right, OJ. Look, Barclays have gone, NatWest going next month, and then rumours circulating that HSBC um, are on the list to maybe close. The only good news about HSBC is that they actually own the building, so you'd hope that they would be relatively responsible and want to work with the bid and the local authority to look at how they might support alternative uses within their existing branch.
so you think it's easier, and this was actually something I was going to ask you. It's easier when the bank is a owner occupier in terms of bringing it back into use.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you can have those discussions. You'd hope that they are, they've been anchors in town centres in terms of HBSP for God knows how long, so that you would hope that they have some kind of sort of conscious in terms of wanting to work with partners. I mean, in terms of HSBC in Rochdale, the branch manager sits on the bid board, so we have a really nice link with him, and he's certainly speaking to me about what the future might look like, and then that allows me to speak to him about, well, how do we work together, so then if you do decide to leave, that we can somehow parachute alternative uses as soon as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And in terms of the other units, do you get any sense that the property owners are willing to look at how they can be flexible to bring new businesses in?
No, look, as far as look, we reach out to them and they still want, they don't seem to be willing to negotiate in terms of price, rental demand. So it just sits them. And of course, we know if it's listed, they are exempt from business rates. So, that doesn't always incentivize the landowner to find alternative uses. But yeah, no, look, we do what we can, and it's not just us at the bid, it's within the council to reach out to property owners and go, hey, what do you want to do? And look, one of the things that we do successfully is that if we get opportunities that we think someone might want to invest in the town centre, we'll link them to property owners. But what we found, certainly since the pandemic, it's the smaller units in the town centre that are the ones that where the demand is. These sort of larger units where you've got high energy bills, high business rates, rental is really, really high. There's just not a great deal of demand out there at the moment. So how do you change that? In terms of Rochdale's experience, it's been on a great regeneration journey over the last 15 years. Uh, but nevertheless, we've got these problems with these buildings. You can't always turn to the local authority and say, oh, do you want to buy it, take it on and do something with it. They can't do everything, so to try and stimulate that private sector investment into the town centre is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And Karen, can I bring you in because you make a really important point about the generation gap, and maybe this is something we bring Jordan back in on. Do you want to
Yeah,
just talk about your thoughts around the generational
yeah, definitely.
issue?
It feels like it's generational. Well, I know when I give my son money, he kind of looks at it as if to say, "What am I going to do with that then?" So we tend to take it and transfer it into his bank. So the younger people are actually getting used to not ever actually handling cash. We have Go Henry cards that kids get, where they're topped up with birthday money and pocket money and all that sort of thing. So they're going to get used to thinking, what is this cash thing? Why do I need it? So is it just this generation of people now that know what the world's like without the internet compared to what will happen in the future? Or are we trying to push a little bit more cash in the future as well?
It's a fair question. Yeah, Jordan, can I bring you in? Because what I haven't been able to see in sort of preparing for this session is stats on the breakdown of demographics when it comes to cash use versus
Yeah.
using other forms of payment methods.
Sure. Well, just on that, the BRC do a really good payment survey, which breaks that down. I think it's monthly or quarterly. But yeah, on Karen's point, I think you're right. I think as younger generations grow up, digital payments are the default. I mean, I'm 30 and I do everything Apple Pay. I rarely have cash on me except to pay my barber. But even with that shift, millions of people rely on cash, and that still includes younger adults who use it to budget and avoid overspending. So while that trend is changing, the demand for cash hasn't disappeared, and for many, it's still essential. And the key is to making sure we don't leave those people behind in the transition, even if it looks like it's going to decline. I think you still can't exclude those who rely on cash.
Can I just
Yeah.
say as well, I was actually at church on Sunday, and they've got a little cafe in the church, and you can imagine what that looks like. It's a few tables and a teapot and a tea cosy, right? They have a sum up machine. Nobody pays by cash.
Mm.
And I was really quite staggered that even in the church, they don't take any money. They just literally take it on a sum up machine. So I thought it's actually infiltrating into areas that when you go to markets now, they've got sum up machines. And you just see the decline so very, very quickly.
I think, Karen, it was a story you told me, which was just like a light bulb going off in my head. And I think was it one day when your son, when I don't know where he was going, but he was going out somewhere, and you noticed his wallet was on the table, and you phoned him up, and you were like, "You've left your wallet. How are you going to pay for anything?" And he's like, "Oh, I've got my phone. What do I need my wallet for? Don't need cash. I don't even need my cards. Don't even need my cards." And that's how quick this changes, isn't it, in terms of tech and how it's adopted and
The
the
other
massive
interesting
generational shift.
thing on the back of that, though, I've since found out since then, is people are quicker to realise they've lost the phone than what they would be to lose the bank cards.
I know that wouldn't surprise. So, admission to everybody, it's been less than a year since I've started using Google Pay. So I'm a newbie at this. Within a few weeks of using Google Pay, it became so easy. There was one day, a few weeks in, where I stopped dead in the street and I realized I'd left my wallet at home. I just don't need it anymore, because of Google Pay, and it's just amazing how quickly you get used to this
Yeah,
change in tech. And
interesting.
no doubt this is one of the big issues for a lot of banks. Sandy, can I bring you in? Because I think this is a really interesting point, regarding some of your independent businesses. Oh, Sandy, are you there? All right. Let me run through your comment then for the recording, so people watching this um, after the fact can get this info, because I do think this is important. So you say, we run three independent businesses in a market town that used to generate around 80% in cash, but that is down to 22% over the last quarter. Wow. Sure looks like Karen is correct that it is a generational thing. Most cash from a traditional chippy and hang on. Most cash from a traditional chippy and very little from a burger trade. It is an ever-changing trading platform with a huge increase in delivering the products as well. Really bad news for our town centre, but one we are adapting to. So there's multiple impacts here, isn't there? I think, what do we do with the empty property? What do we do to support those communities that still rely on cash for some really, really good reasons, to make sure they're not excluded from the local economy? What do we do to support those small businesses in terms of their journey in tech as well, in terms of digital payments and the use of cash? There are so many big implications to this. I do feel it merits sort of further discussion. So yeah, still open to the floor for any comments and questions, especially while we've still got Paul and Jordan, who will need to leave us soon as well.
I do have one more thing I'd like to ask as well, OJ, if that's okay. If we continue to go down the track we're going down now, so it becomes cashless, right? And then people decide, some people, like the most deprived people in society, probably quite rightly, like OJ said, still probably use cash because of budgeting reasons. And retailers then start to restrict, start to say to people, we don't accept cash. Those people that are deprived will have fewer and fewer places where they can buy their basics for their needs. And that could start to push the price up for some of those items. I'm thinking things like, your gas meter at home. The people that pay on a meter pay more per kilowatt than what you do if you pay by direct debit. So you actually start penalising the poorest in the society for actually wanting to use cash. How do we safeguard this against for those people?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge challenge, and you think about some of the people that do rely on cash. So, for example, people with mental health concerns. might use cash for good reason becomes a real challenge. Like my dad, for example, we have to make sure he doesn't have access to his own bank accounts. He can use cash because it limits the damage he does when he's spending freely. But that means there's only so many places he can go and he can shop. And there is this whole challenge, reading through the issue as well, of the whole infrastructure that supports cash. And if that infrastructure um, isn't well used enough, then concerns about how that is supported if so few people are using cash. So there's a lot to take on board with that. There's just so much to work through when it comes to that issue. It really is a huge challenge. So yeah, other questions and comments as well. You put a link for
Yeah,
historic
yeah.
England as well.
I'll just come in. It's an example in Bacup where a former or an abandoned bank was restored, and I think it was through the Heritage Action Zone designations. Many of you will be aware that that's a partnership between local authorities and Historic England in finding some money to restore historic buildings. But I suppose my fear is, this was saved because it was an abandoned building, so it had to get to that stage of being abandoned and probably been vacant for many, many years before the local authority in Historic England had to step in. So my fear is that we don't want to get to that stage in any town where you've got this glut of banks which have been abandoned, vacant for a long time, where eventually people realise, God, we've got to do something. I would hope that, certainly in Rochdale and working with local authority and landlords, we can step in before we start using the word abandoned. We can just use the word vacant, because obviously if it's abandoned, all sorts of money has to be found to bring them back into a fit state before even then thinking about a future use for them. So yeah, so it is a good example. Like I say, Historic England, I think, have a role in all this because as we know, they are the guardians of historic buildings in towns and cities. So I just thought I would share there is a good example in Bacup, but it got to the stage where the listed building was abandoned. Um, so yeah, and I've just seen Karen's put high street rental auctions. Well, I think we all have an opinion on high street rental auctions. I'm not a huge fan. Um, but anyway, yeah, it's just a worry that I think many of us will share up and down the land what to do with these historic buildings. And I think there's a case study somewhere that someone leads on in terms of pulling out all good examples, which allows local authorities and bids to put pressure on landlords to sort these things out. And it might be the threat of high street rental auctions. Who knows?
Yeah, it might well be actually. Karen was thinking exactly the same thing I was thinking is what role high street rental auctions might have in terms of helping bring these properties back into use as quickly as possible. And I don't think there's anything that can be done immediately because obviously a high street rental auction cannot be used unless that property has been vacant for 12 months or more. Um, but certainly the threat of a rental auction might be one of the things, Paul, to think about in relation to those property owners where the bank has already left, and the property owner isn't willing to think flexibly in terms of how the property is used. So it might not necessarily about going down that road and starting the process of a rental auction. Just a word with the property owner to say, look, these powers are there. We want to support you. It would be a shame if the local authority decided to come in with a high street rental auction. Let's help you bring that property back into use, but we need to be a bit flexible in terms of some of the terms and conditions. Maybe that's something to consider. Maybe that helps start a conversation.
Yeah, look, it might bring them out the woodwork, but as we know, I think we've raised this in terms of Rochdale Council, who's leading on high street rental auctions within the authority, and of course, capacity is a massive challenge for them, and it's just another thing to do. I think from memory, in the Greater Manchester family, it's Stockport who are going to almost be the pilot town in looking at high street rental auctions, and then all other towns in Greater Manchester can hopefully learn from their experience. But it's certainly something that, look, I would be prepared to write to the landlord and say, oh, by the way, you know, this potentially could be down the road in terms of looking at high street rental auction. So I'd be almost coming across as a friend, and maybe that would draw them to the table. Who knows? We'll certainly try anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it. Play the good cop card.
Yeah.
Absolutely worthwhile. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let Jordan go because Jordan, I know you need to be away by 11 o'clock. Yeah, thanks a lot for the contribution. That information is really, really helpful, and it's good to get perspective of a really critical part of the high street.
Thanks a lot, AJ. And yeah, good to see you all. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jordan. And Julie, can I bring you in terms of how you think rental auctions can play a role? And I do apologise for anybody who's outside of England, because rental auctions at the moment is England only. But Julie, I think you raise a really important point about how a rental auction could play a positive role in this.
Yeah, morning. Sorry, my camera doesn't seem to switch on. What does it? I don't know. I've got a green light, but I'm not sure if I can be seen. But yeah, in terms of the rental auctions, the kind of the defining of the boundary, as long as the boundary line includes the banks, that's the first thing, is to kind of define the boundary, and then collecting a data set so that all of the landlords can be identified and communicated with. That's definitely something that would be a positive aspect, and you know, just being that friend in the neighbourhood to say, you know, we'd like to understand what your plans are for the property, you know, just engage them in conversation, and to subtly mention it's part of the high street rental auctions approach doesn't necessarily mean you're about to launch into a high street rental auction, but you at least get that conversation started. I'm not sure that there's much appetite for local authorities to really roll up their sleeves and get started with a rental auction because of this kind of unknown level of how much time is it going to take up, and whether or not the funding that's been set aside will actually enable that to be paid for. But I think using it for its purpose, which is a tool to get a conversation started, is definitely worthwhile thinking about.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think I do endorse that, and I think that's probably part of a strategy, isn't it, for laying the groundwork for bringing those properties back into use, is getting those property owners on side, and you know, just making sure it's in the back of their mind that there are tools that can be used by a local authority if it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
But it's in everybody's best interest that we work together to bring a property back into use.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to identify the landlords of some of these sort of historical buildings as well, and you know, there might be absent landlords that it's just like an investment for them, and they've not really got any connection with the individual place. That's always a big issue also. But yeah, just getting the ball rolling and starting the conversation.
No, absolutely. Totally agree. Totally agree. Right, everybody, we are at 11 o'clock. So if anybody has any more questions or comments, say them now, or I shall let you continue with your sunny Tuesday, and we'll see you all soon. Anything else? No, fabulous. Right, all. Great to see you. Paul, thank you very much for raising this topic. I think it's something we will continue to work on. So there's so many implications from this. It really takes us in a lot of different directions, and there's a lot of problems with bank closures. So I do think we need to be supporting members in preparing for what happens when your bank leaves town. because as we've seen from the stats in terms of the growth of digital payments and the drop in footfall a lot of banks are seeing, I just, for many, I don't see their physical network as being viable anymore, especially in sort of local centres, smaller centres, anything but the sort of big city centres. So it is something we will need to continue to monitor and to work on. Brill, thank you very much, everybody. I shall see you all soon.